Hello, everybody. Nice to hear you guys. Thank you for coming to the Bell Diaspora TV today. And today we are having a conversation with UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus, Dr. Anaïs MARIN. Anaïs, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Vera, for inviting me.
Anaïs, I would like to start talking to you regarding the special report you have submitted recently on the situation of human rights in Belarus. And in this report, you have given recommendations on sort of to international community on the ways we can deal with the situation in Belarus. And you mentioned that we can continue a push on sort of universal jurisdiction mechanisms to bring to the account those responsible for committing atrocities against human rights in Belarus. People really worried that we don't have much of a leverage on the situation. Could you please explain how we can resolve the issue of human rights in Belarus if we have any ways of dealing with it?
Well, first of all, as an independent expert appointed by the Human Rights Council, I operate within the framework of a code of conduct which demands impartiality, neutrality, and objectivity, and I must attempt at addressing in priority my recommendations to the government of Belarus itself, which I've been doing for the past 5 years as I'm in this position. Unfortunately, the government does not recognize the mandate, does not cooperate with it, and doesn't pay attention much to the recommendations. That is also why the international community at large is a destinatory of my more general recommendations on how to help improve the situation with human rights in Belarus. I publish 2 reports per year, and the one you mentioned was, I guess, for the General Assembly, and it covered one topic each year. I pick one theme. Last year it was the situation of people compelled to exile. This year, I focused on the instrumentalization of the legislation countering terrorism and anti-extremism law for further repressive purposes, including of people actually in exile. And among the recommendations I make, of course, among many of them, which are on the shoulders, I would say, of all the countries that do pay attention to human rights worldwide and to the situation of human rights in Belarus, is indeed to fight impunity. Because for the past 3 years, I've been repeating, shouting as loud as I could, that the situation with human rights in Belarus has become catastrophic and that it is far from improving. Unfortunately, and people tend to ignore that, many people in foreign countries seem to have forgotten that the situation in Belarus has kept on deteriorating, and it is extremely worrying. But Belarus has fallen out of the agenda, basically. It's other more pressing issues, including on the continent, have taken most of the attention since February 2022. And as a result, unfortunately, the commitments that were made to fight impunity are still, well, we are expecting them to deliver. Impunity is like accountability. So that's what your question was about. Making sure that perpetrators of the human rights violations that have occurred in August 2020 and in the following months have to be held accountable for their crimes, because when we talk about violations in general, there were many of them, but some of them are crimes, and some of them could even amount to crimes against humanity.
Absolutely.
This is a statement that was made by the High Commissioner for Human Rights himself in his last report, published in March 2023, pursuant of a resolution that has established this separate mandate, separate from mine, called an accountability mechanism, indeed, to hold accountable those responsible for the violations that occurred in the context of the 2020 elections. With that in mind, the UN, and notably the Office of the High Commissioner, has gathered evidence interviews with the help of independent experts and with my cooperation as well, of course, evidence of the violations that occurred and the list of perpetrators as well. And this is being held available for whatever prosecutor and judges will adjudicate these cases. The conditions for fair trial in Belarus are not guaranteed. There is no independent judiciary, and therefore we cannot expect the crimes that have been committed mostly against peaceful protesters to be adjudicated there. That is why we all hope for other tribunals to take care of this. Many countries, democratic countries, do recognize the principle of universal jurisdiction of their tribunals for such serious crimes, especially as crimes against humanity. And that is why, from what I know, a number of countries, a number of tribunals abroad, in Lithuania, in Germany, and other countries, are currently opening investigations about this. They have the opportunity to interrogate victims, because many of the victims, if they're not currently in jail in Belarus, have chosen exile as well, even after serving their sentence in Belarus. And so they're available to testify. And we are here, I hold, and this OHCHR examination on Belarus, the Secretariat holds available our evidence, these testimonies we gathered for as elements of proof.
Thank you very much. It's a very good news. I hope that everybody who is listening to me now and interested in this topic will kind of breathe with a sign of relief, because we were wondering what was going on with all the universal jurisdiction and with all the evidences that were gathered, because we know that witnesses were giving statements. And another question, which is kind of following from your report as well, is the situation we have right now with Belarusian refugees and asylum seekers and people who ran away from the regime in 2020, for instance, to Lithuania, due to the war in Ukraine. The political situation and political treatment of those people have changed dramatically. And right now we have a situation when people in Lithuania, Belarusians in Lithuania, are sort of reconsidered, and their asylum-seeking claims are reviewed, and their work permits are under review, and many of them suddenly become considered as the threat to national security of Lithuania. And for instance, human rights activist as Olga Karach and her organization Our House, which is the sort of civil initiative organization, is also under review, and she considered national security to Lithuania. What is going on? Can you comment on the situation? Because in your report, it was sort of encouraged to keep Belarusians safe and understand that they do run away from the regime and they face prosecution and possibly death penalties in Belarus.
Well, indeed, my effort is oriented towards showing to the whole world that it is not safe for most people who have been compelled into exile to return to Belarus currently. The legislation has been toughened over the past years with a repressive objective in mind, which I even equate with a desire for vengeance on the part of the authorities against people that it considers as traitors for having criticized the government and its policies, and for having supposedly left for a better future abroad. And from what I can say, because it's now I'm currently in the UK conducting interviews with some of the people compelled to exile, but I've been in the past to other countries. I've been to Belgium. I happen to live in Poland, where I have met many of them. I've been to Georgia last year. So I am in good position now with all the interviews we gathered to consider that many of these people are there absolutely not by choice. And the conditions of their forced exile have been, in some cases, absolutely dramatic. And unfortunately, there is no conditions for their safe return in Belarus. But as you mentioned, since February 2022, Belarus is perceived abroad as a co-aggressor, and it's handled so. And unfortunately, there is a trend towards associating the people of Belarus, the Belarusian passport holders, with perpetrators of the crime of aggression, which is the responsibility of the government. And I try in my advocacy efforts and awareness raising, talking to media, etc., to remind that Belarusians who have dared to oppose the war or criticize it have faced arbitrary detention and arrests and torture in detention. And therefore, the conditions are absolutely not there in terms of freedom of expression, the right to the freedom of expression, for them to voice out their criticism of the war. That is why I really try to repeat to all the host countries first, well, thank them for hosting people compelled to exile, because, well, they needed somewhere to go. And it happened that it turned out that Ukraine was not anymore a safe state for them. Russia is not, Georgia is not totally anymore. So all those who are in the EU or in the UK, I would say are temporarily safe. However, they are being, from what I can see, discriminated against on the ground of their nationality. And this is, in my view, unfair. And this has to be, this is an issue that I raise indeed with the authorities of these host countries. Among the, and also because the situation, as I was saying, has continued to deteriorate, and the governments of Belarus seems intent on making things even more complicated for these people in exile. It suffices to mention the legislative amendments that have introduced the possibility of punishing so-called extremists sentenced in absentia with the withdrawal of their citizenship. There have been no cases reported to us so far, but it's sort of a Damocles sword over their heads for those who have who are now on the extremist list, and this list is over almost 4,000 names now. The latest development, which is extremely concerning and which has kept me very busy over the past months, is of course this decree of the president dating back to in September that has restricted the number of consular services available for Belarusians abroad, including the possibility to renew their passport and the possibility also to establish a power of attorney in order to be represented back in Belarus by a relative or whoever they want in transactions, including real estate transactions. And this is extremely concerning. It's creating huge problems everywhere, because a passport is not only a travel document, it's also an ID in many countries. So if you have an ID that has expired and you cannot renew it in a consulate, you are forced to go back to your country, where from all the information we have, you risk, again, arrest and ill treatment. So you cannot safely return. This I've been repeating it for a number of months. Very true. If they cannot return, they end up potentially being illegal residents in their country of exile, with numerous problems that target everybody, not only people who have been like dissidents or people who have fled over the past months, but even diaspora, old-time diaspora. Their children, underage children, are in a situation where they can be left without a valid ID because their passport has expired. And in that conditions, you cannot open a bank account, you cannot get credit from a bank, you can, sometimes it's difficult to register at university, you cannot get insurance, rental contract, etc., etc. So that is why I recommend, I commend the decisions that were made by some host countries, neighboring ones, especially Lithuania and Poland too, who are aware of the situation of Belarusians and have quite some experience now in hosting refugees from several countries of the region, for all what they have done to adapt their own legislation and practices in order to make sure that Belarusians are not discriminated against just on the ground that their passport has expired, bearing in mind that it's impossible to renew it.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
There are other issues, and I'm extremely concerned about the risk that other people tried in absentia, for example, among the punishment is also, apart from fines, it's the seizure of their property back in Belarus. If they, and I have the impression that the authorities faced with economic problems or looming economic problems might want to just appropriate.
Just steal from people, just steal from activists who left their homes, yes. And
yes, and
expropriate.
That is very concerning as well. That is also why another, if you allow me, another matter of concern that I am raising now in my discussions with the international community, if we can call it like this, with diplomats from host countries, is the risk that Belarusian nationals, either because they don't have a valid passport or because they don't have any more pages available in their current passport to stick a new visa or have stamps for those who have an EU passport and travel around outside of the EU or outside of the UK, get a stamp each time on the visa, and then there's no more pages on the passport is invalid or has to be renewed. It's impossible. In these circumstances, or in the event that the person is on a wanted list in Belarus for so-called extremist or terrorism activities, and again, calling for sanctions, calling the war a war, all of this can be considered extremist back in Belarus. They might be extradited back to Belarus because the government uses and abuses the Interpol list and agreements, bilateral agreements for mutual help in the judiciary field, or when it comes to tax police, etc., to have these people forcefully returned. And again, I call past governments to be extremely cautious when examining case by case these requests, in order to not hand back a victim of human rights violation to someone who will further commit abuse against that person and jail or torture him or her. As for Lithuania, I got your question, but I'm not habilitated to give recommendations to one state or another, and absolutely not to judge how a host country is evaluating its own security, national security concerns. I'm in the human rights defense field. Here it's the work of intelligence, I believe, to identify who represents a threat for national security and on what grounds. I don't have the means to determine that. I just understand that in some circumstances there is a dilemma where the person is a victim of human rights violations or is a human rights defender, and Olga Karach is of course one of them, and Nasz Dom has been doing huge, very good work on women's rights, on children's rights, and I supported that, of course. But if there are concerns, I don't think the Lithuanians will deport her back to Belarus, where she would probably face long prison term, if not death penalty. However, I understand that it can be an issue of concern for them, and I just hope that this country, Lithuania is a very small country which has done absolutely a lot for human rights in Belarus, will maintain this balance between concerns for human rights in Belarus and national security of Lithuania. It's a difficult balance to maintain.
Thank you so much, and hopefully this is exactly what will happen. And I'm also very grateful to all the countries who actually host Belarusian refugees and people who are running away from the atrocities of the regime and trying to save themselves. And I'm glad that our activists can find self-refuge somewhere on this planet. And I'm really grateful to every government official who actually works with Belarusians, and thank you very much. My kind of last question, if you have a minute, how can we help the situation as activists? What can we do to help you to raise the awareness?
Well, the one of the main problems and one of the main weaknesses, I believe now, of the international mechanisms that try to maintain attention on Belarus and maintain Belarus high on the political agenda as well, is that we receive this doubts. I mean, some people express doubts about the legitimacy of reports when we don't have the cooperation of the concerned state. So we don't have information from the authorities, basically. So we cannot make a balanced evaluation of the situation. Or concerned about the methodology for gathering evidence, given that human rights defenders in Belarus are either all in jail or in exile. And that's a reality. And the civil society has been purged from all its elements that could be of use for verifying information. We're talking about journalists, bloggers, whistleblowers, lawyers have been en masse barred from disbarred, so they lost their licenses. But so that creates a situation where it's extremely difficult to get evidence, to cross-check evidence, to verify it. But we still need to do it. And that is why I trust fully veteran human rights defense organizations such as Vyasna, Human Constanta, and others, with which we are cooperating on a daily basis. I trust them to continue doing their work in terms of verification, but caring not to put at risk their informants who are on the field, because that's the last thing we want. And at the UN, we comply with the principle of do no harm. And that is why maybe my reports have lost a bit of outreach or in comparison with others, because I have to anonymize many of the names of the victims, because otherwise they would face retaliation. They personally, or their relatives who are in detention, or their relatives, elderly, sometimes parents who are back in Belarus and get these calls from the KGB for prophylactic talks. They get searches at their home. It's a very high stress, and the risk of retaliation is extremely high. So how can we do? I mean, the activists, I commend the work of the human rights activists, Belarusians or other. They are very innovative given the difficulty, and they can do their work very well, and they care about cyber safety, which is extremely important for whatever they're doing. So I guess you should ask them. I mean, anybody should refer to them and ask for their best practices, because they do have good advice to share. When it comes to governments, I believe that they should continue supporting civil society organizations, both in Belarus, if it's possible, but we know it's extremely difficult, and abroad, because these people abroad, those who were forced into exile, human rights defenders or civil society organizations or journalists, they maintain a high level of professionalism. They are cautious enough not to put their informants at risk, and they can help. Through them, we can continue helping governments who care, foundations, human rights defense, international human rights defenders can continue helping those in need. We would like to do it directly. We would like to have projects about human rights education in Belarusian schools. That is something that would be normal if we had normal relations between international human rights mechanisms at the UN and the Belarusian government. Unfortunately, for lack of better, this is the recommendation I can make. Continue supporting civil society of Belarus wherever, whenever possible, in exile if needed, trusting that the money, the support, the advice will go into the right hands. In Belarus, there are still people who need it desperately.
Thank you so much, Anaïs, and I would like to thank you for your work as well. Thank you for working with Belarus, with Belarusian activists, and thank you for caring about my country. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We would like to finish our talk now, and thanks again to everybody who is watching, and I will put Russian subtitles in so people can understand what we were talking about. So thanks again, and have a great day, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.